Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us for our Q&A for the Enneagram of the Higher Mind, the 8-week training to transform your patterns and fixations through the 9 Holi ideas. I'm Ann Patricio, and I'm honored to be your host for this Q&A, where we'll explore the teachings of Russ Hudson, who is here with us to address questions about his 8-week video course, the Enneagram of the Higher Mind, which begins Wednesday, October the 16th. Now, if you're unable to join us live, you can still participate in this course, even if you are not able to be with us in person. I'll explain more about that later. But first, I'd like to introduce my guests. Russ Hudson, the co-founder of the Enneagram Institute and president of Enneagram Personality Types, Inc. Russ has been co-teaching the Enneagram professional training programs since 1991 and is a founding director and former vice president of the International Enneagram Association. He knows his stuff, yes. Russ is co-author of many Enneagram books, including The Wisdom of the Enneagram, Personality Types, Understanding the Enneagram, many, many more. He is one of our beloved faculty here at the Shift Network, a gift to the Enneagram community and pretty much to the world. Welcome, Russ. Great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Ann. It is wonderful to be here and looking forward to exploring this with you and with the folks who are listening and watching us right now.
Would you be willing to lead us in an opening practice today?
Certainly. I think it's often a good idea to do that when we're exploring ideas, because when we're more centered, we actually retain the information better. We can learn more easily. Or let's say that which we learn finds its way to the right places in us. So the Enneagram is about presence, really. And it has as a central teaching this idea of the centers, which are guides, really. They assist us in finding our way to presence. The big barrier to being present is always assuming that I already am. And I might be to some degree, but as we'll see, with just a little turn of our attention, we can become much more present in even a very short time. So we might begin by bringing our attention to the body intelligence. And we can do that, practically speaking, by noticing our breath. Now, that doesn't mean thinking about it. It doesn't mean controlling it or manipulating it. It means noticing it. Can I notice the sensation of breathing as I inhale and exhale? Such a simple thing. My body is breathing and will be until further notice. But can I be awake to the experience of breathing? If I can do that, it's a first step in freeing up enough attention to actually do some inner work. Yeah, there's my breath. And if I find my breath, chances are good that I'll start to feel more sensation in my whole body. So I want to notice that. Can I notice just the movement of my chest and belly as I inhale and exhale? Can I notice the sensation of my body resting on the chair I'm sitting in, the cushion I'm sitting in, wherever I might be? Yeah, I can feel that. Can I sense my feet resting on the ground or wherever they might be? Again, not thinking about them, not visualizing them, but just sensing them from the inside out. Maybe it's just a little tingle at first, but whatever I find, I stick with that. And I stay with the sensation. as I do that, my heart starts to be more affected by what's here now instead of whatever has been running through my mind. Well, I start to be touched by this living moment that I'm in. My heart starts to be more connected to presence. And that's a very different experience than when my heart is being knocked around by memories and fantasies and fears and all the things that constitute big parts of my egoic life. It's a really different thing when body and heart start to come together and I'm more affected and touched by right where I am. Just notice there's a softness in that, a kindness. It's a more gentle way of being with myself. I start to really take in the incredible sensitivity of my being. And then I may also notice that my mind is expanding, opening up. And I might experience it as more spaciousness. I might experience it as just simply things getting quieter. Now, there may still be thoughts or images going through my awareness, but they're not the only thing. I'm not smushed up against them. I'm aware of, let's say, the media in which those thoughts and images come and go. So there's a deepening stillness, a deepening quiet. And I may notice that it's not vague or sleepy. There's a beautiful, crisp precision to my perception as these different parts of myself start to come together. And I see that I could continue this way, and it will continue to open up new, wonderful, and amazing perspectives and realizations. It may also bring up issues, emotions, things I need to see and deal with. They become clearer. But I also see there are more resources available to be with whatever I need to be with. And in this way, our work will grow and continue to expand. And this is the foundation and basis and the place from which the perceptions of my personality will become useful. If I'm looking at the particularities of my Enneagram pattern from here, it's very different than just having very various opinions about myself. And so, thank you. And you can keep coming back to this as we explore the questions that you all have. Um, I invite you to keep coming back to your breath, your sensation, the gentleness of your heart, and this deeper quiet of your mind, which often can just be experienced as deep listening. So, yeah, and let's see what questions we have coming in.
Thanks, Russ. Always so nice to drop in. Thank you. We'll spend the rest of our time together exploring your questions for Russ, and we're preparing for his course, The Enneagram of the Higher Mind, which begins on Wednesday, October the 16th. So please visit our website, highermindenneagram.com, to learn more about this 8-week video course. There's a link there to register as well. So let's get started. If you have a question for Russ, please type it in and we'll be reading them out. And I also want to thank everyone who shared so many wonderful questions through our webcast. We really appreciate. We'll try to get to as many as possible. We also may be grouping them because some were similar and we're able to do that. So we'll start with this one that Jock and actually a few others wanted to know, Russ. How did you first start exploring the Enneagram? And how has it transformed your life?
Wow, that's a fun question. Well, I think I started a little differently than probably many people have or did. When I first started studying the Enneagram, the typology that was the work mostly of Oscar Ichazo, based on a number of teachings that he was drawing upon, wasn't really known very much. I came to the Enneagram through the Gurdjieff work. And so I learned it first as a kind of matrix, a mandala, a symbol of the way human consciousness perceives things, organizes perceptions, and so forth. I learned it as a model of process. And it was a very different way of coming to it. I also learned it as a living and dynamic system. I learned it through a series of dances called the Gurdjieff movements. Now, this didn't necessarily mean that we were dancing around an Enneagram symbol or something like that. I mean, sometimes. But more generally, these dances were they were based in the mathematics that generate the Enneagram. So my introduction was more into the background of the Enneagram, the deep metaphysic behind it, the philosophy behind it. So it was much later on that I encountered this particular expression of the Enneagram that Oscar Ichazo brought out through his Eureka School. And I was fascinated by it and saw that there was great utility in it being an assist to people trying to do real, sincere, authentic inner work. And that was always the way I held it. So when I encountered Don Richard Riso in the late 1980s, he had written his first book, Personality Types, which was really the beginning of the popular view of the Enneagram coming out and the 9 types coming out to the general public. I came to him from having been in the Gurdjieff work, and we initiated a long conversation, a many-year conversation about how the understanding of the types could be reintegrated with this deeper teaching of the development of the human being as an integration of the different elements of our psyche. So that's there's an answer to that. So I hope that addresses your question in some sense. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Russ. How does the Enneagram help us in finding out who we are and our relationship to a higher being, God, etc.?
Well, there's an idea in the mystical views of spirituality that I have found true in my experience, that if we were to use the term God, and I'm using that specifically for people for whom that's a concept that they live with. I'm aware that some people don't prefer that term. I do my best to try to speak different languages when I'm teaching this work because I want people to have the experience. Let's say that in searching for our authentic self, we discover more about the nature of God. And in a sincere search for the nature of God, of the divine, we encounter more of what a human being is and something about our purpose in this world. I am not one who takes the view that you are God. It's a tricky business. There is the ego gets a hold of a statement like that and makes a lot of mischief out of it. And there are some subtleties of understanding that are kind of important along the way. I would say that when we study the Enneagram, we start to see that we're looking for something that's very important, very sacred to our heart, but we see that we've been barking up the wrong tree, that the way we're going after what we love is never going to work. We're going to keep producing the same result over and over, and that result is often, unfortunately, basic human suffering. We start to find that there's another way toward what we want, and that way is toward presence, towards surrender, towards opening to the mystery of reality. And I think that in that process, we also start to, how can I put it? We start to feel our place in the world in a different way. And it's hard to put that into words, but it's an unmistakable perception. We start to feel that even in just our simple daily activities, by the way we're learning to connect more deeply with our deeper intelligence, our deeper heart, we're participating in something bigger. We're taking our place in God's plan, you might say. If I was speaking about this specifically to a Christian audience, for example, I might say that the Enneagram is a study of how we forget the presence of grace and how we keep trying out of our ego patterns to produce something that only grace can bring. And so the Enneagram is a teaching about a growing surrender and a recognition of where we find the things that we really love, the real treasures of our heart, both in terms of the things in our life that matter to us and the things that are, in some sense, our inner garden, our inner sacred place. And in a really beautiful and interesting way, the more we do the work, the more those two become not separate things, become a kind of seamless unity. So there's a lot that could be said. That's such a rich question, but I hope I touched on a few elements there that are helpful.
You definitely did. Thank you. Jill is saying, does each type have a specific pathway to getting to higher mind? And do the centers impact our accessibility of this higher aspect of self? I find that movement really helps me get to the space of quiet mind and wonder if there is a key here for me.
Yeah, I think for many people, movement can be extremely helpful. I'm an Enneagram 5, and so I was all about mind, right? But one of my big life lessons, one of the things I really gained from this lifelong exploration is that the less I'm embodied, the less I can really understand anything, the less I really know. So I would say yes, the higher mind opens as the ordinary centers start to come into alignment. I would add that the deeper heart, the heart of love, the heart of compassion, the heart of acceptance, what in Enneagram speak we call the higher intellectual and the higher emotional centers, they open and come into more play as we get our ordinary psyche sorted out. So anything that helps us really land in the body is our friend. And movement can definitely be that. My only caution is to say that there is a difference between moving with presence and felt sense and just moving around. If anybody, if it were just enough to just move around, then every dancer and athlete should be a Buddha or be enlightened, and that's not the case. We do a lot of movement without much sensing of the movement. We're not inhabiting the movement. We're doing it kind of automatically. But we can learn through movement to inhabit our body. We can also learn to reawaken our physical activities by our inhabiting of them. So that, yes, you can't really address higher mind without coming to terms with being in the living body and sorting through our emotions. Um, I really feel that it's our unprocessed emotions, our undealt with traumas, our leftover issues from childhood are what keep our mind busy and preoccupied and stirred up. And so as we learn to clear enough mind space and to be grounded in ourselves enough to address some of those emotional issues, the deeper mind naturally opens up and reveals more and more, because the mind is then relieved from the job of attending to my inner suffering and these wounds I carry around. So, I think the Enneagram really helps us see that there's no advantage in just playing favorites with the centers. There's no advantage in just doing one particular line of work. As we go through our journey, we're going to need several different lines of work, and we're going to learn about how it all comes together. The whole idea is to become more unified as a human being. And that's no small feat. And for me, just that happening is already something very sacred.
Why is it that some points are comprised of 2 or 3 holy ideas, while others have only one?
hmm I think that has to do with the way we use words in a particular language. Sometimes words in other languages can hold a different place. They might stand for more than they do in English, or sometimes there's a word that gets to a specific experience more precisely in another language. I think that when Oscar Chazo was exploring this and trying to describe his take on these non-dual perspectives that we're calling the holy ideas, he found that sometimes a single word, rightly understood, could capture it, but that sometimes to get kind of the gestalt of what that particular quality of consciousness is like, what that perspective of reality looks like, he used more than one concept or more than one word. So, for example, point 3 has 3 words. It doesn't mean that the 3 has more holy ideas than, say, point 1 that just has one word. It means that to really get the sense of the holy idea of 3, it kind of helped to look at it from some different angles. What you really get about the holy ideas, they're not concepts that are easily confined to a single word. They're not easily confined to a single concept. So even when we have a single word, it might take a while to unpack what we mean by that word, what that word is pointing to. Because when we actually get a glimpse of the perspectives, we will notice that we have experienced this before. We have seen the world this way before. It's not alien to us. It's simply that we never had any context to put it in. But that you start to see how these perspectives are, in a real way, beyond our usual way of looking at things. So they don't fit in our usual way of looking at things. It's more like our usual way of looking things has to open up to this deeper reality. And that's why we do the practices and why we take time to sort of describe what these words are pointing to, until it's sort of like, when you're trying to help somebody see a constellation at night, you kind of have to point them a little bit. It's a little over there. Okay, see that bright star there? Now go down a little bit to the left and like 2 stars over there. You see that? You see those in a row? it's a bit like that. We're trying to help each other zero in on something within the field of our experience that, as I said, we probably have experience, but we didn't really have a context for it.
Thanks, Russ. Okay, this one from Mary. My husband died suddenly and unexpectedly in July. He was a wonderful, wise 5, and I am a 9. We had good conversation about our relative tendencies, and it was good. I'm looking to the Enneagram for this stage of my grief and going forward. What suggestions do you have? Thank you.
That's a very deep question. I want to honor it. I'm not sure that my knowledge is what's going to be helpful here. It's what's in my heart. I think when we touch into grief, obviously, we're missing the person we love. And it's funny how often what we're missing is stuff that we would have taken for granted while they were alive. In some cases, it's things that we might have even been mildly annoyed at while they were alive. But now, in their absence, we feel that absence. I find grief a very mysterious place in the human soul, in the human heart. I find that when I am with grief and let it just move through me, I find it's about more than the particularities of the loss that I've experienced. It connects me with a deeper, deeper, deeper truth about the human journey and the human heart. And there's an element in point 4 that we will be exploring in the course for sure that has to do with the nature of intimacy and the timelessness of intimacy, and how in moments that we're really truly present with someone, or we're truly intimate with someone, in a sense that moment is still alive in us. It's like it's the truth of that moment resonates in eternity. So there's a way in which being with the absence strips away a lot of the usual stuff we get preoccupied with, and it can open a door to a simple appreciation of life as it's presenting itself to me now. But there's also this sense, a growing awareness, if I can just presence the whole panoply of feelings and see something of the where that fountain of feelings is coming from, if you can follow that idea. It leads me to this place of mystery and intimacy where nothing can be attached to, nothing can be held on to, but everything that I'm seeking is there, including my love for that person. And the last thing I'd say is, and I've had a lot of loss in my life. My love for someone is my business. Sometimes people physically leave, as was the case with your husband, who sounded like a wonderful man. Sometimes people just choose different pathways, and there can be grief about that. But my love for someone, whether they're loving me back or not, whether they're here physically or not, is very close to the place I was talking about. And as I said, that love is such an intimate and personal thing, and it goes on regardless of the results or regardless of someone being able to bounce that back to me. Like where this place is, there isn't separation. There aren't two objects. And that's where it brings some of the holy ideas into this. And, this inspires me. I think when we do the course, I will explore this particular vein. But other than that, I just hold you in the grief and the journey you're on. I pray you have some beautiful friends around you who are good companions that you can talk with. And as a 9, the way you're able to just drop in and be in the great groundedness of yourself is going to be a tremendous help to coming to the place that I'm talking about. And I wish you peace and ease on that journey.
Thanks, Russ, and thanks, Mary, for that question. There's a few questions around this that kind of tie into where you just went, that we were able to see you go to, Russ, I think, in your answering of that question, which was, as you said, moving out of your head and into your heart. How can a 5 reach their heart? Is Ella's question on Facebook. And also ties into this one about, since the higher mind seems to be beyond our usual mental thinking, how do we begin to access this expanded awareness? So a lot of questions around the moving into that space and how to access it.
Yeah. In a sense, the deeper heart and the higher mind are already here. They're always here. The problem is not so much creating them or producing them. It's more seeing that I'm preoccupied with a very small part of my consciousness, and to see that preoccupation with compassion, because those preoccupations got generated out of the fears and needs of our childhood, out of the deprivations that we may have gone through, out of our romantic disappointments. Heaven knows if you've been on the earth more than a few seconds, you've got some boo-boos. And so in learning to be present with those, by being grounded in the bottom of your body, grounded in your body, sensing in the way I was talking about, being able to hold your emotions more, the mind gets freed up from the constant job of trying to take care of these emotional hurts. In a certain sense, you could say that the fixations are the mind doing a caretaking job of these heart hurts. And it's going to keep doing that until there's some other way that we come in to go through a healing journey. So vis-a-vis the question about 5s, I think that we don't necessarily grow by being told that we need to go after something other than what is meaningful to us. We have to work with what actually motivates our heart. Our heart has a kind of beautiful, holy stubbornness. Our heart wants what it wants, loves what it loves. So there's a way in which 5, for example, wants to know, loves realization, loves revelation, loves knowing the truth, finding out what's really going on. So there's no need to argue with that need or to make it less than something else. It's more that we discover that knowing comes to us with far more power and frequency the more we're connected with our heart, and that we can't really connect the heart and mind if we're not embodied. And my habit of mind as a 5 is to connect with neither of those. I distance myself from my emotions, and I certainly go around to some degree detached from my physical life and my physical needs. So we learn that when we put Humpty Dumpty back together again, and that's true for all 9 types, the thing that we're wanting becomes more attainable, more realizable. And then the other big surprising thing is in the 5, as you start to actually have knowing, the knowing you've been looking for, the realization you've been looking for, you start to also understand that it's here not just for you yourself, but for service. And so that understanding, that potential brilliance that can happen in us, is in service to the support of others. So the heart and mind start to work in tandem to create a meaningful and hopefully beautiful human life. So all of these things you're asking are spot on from my point of view, and these are the kind of things that we want to unpack in this course as big themes. Uh, and I'm very excited to hear these questions because this is what the Enneagram's really about. Finding your type is a tremendous start. But even find your type, don't you find it true you start to see elements of the other types in you too? And you start to understand the whole point of it is not just to identify with a certain pattern, but to discover what we are beyond those patterns while appreciating that our humanity is expressing itself through certain forms and gifts. And there's no need to reject that or um, minimize it. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Carla and others are asking about how this course will go beyond what you've taught in other shift courses, such as depth, approach, that sort of thing. And you're addressing the Holi ideas.
Okay. Well, I think that the power of this course is going to be in its specificity. I think in some of the courses we've touched on some of these topics, but because we were covering a lot of other topics, we could only touch on them. So in this one, I want to go a lot deeper. Personally, I think, and some people will say, well, that's because you're a 5, Russ, but I don't think that's why. I think the head center is the least understood center of them all. And so it behooves us to spend a little more time understanding what it's like when it opens up, what are some of the qualities like when we come to our true mind, and what are some of the barriers? Why does our mind do some of the weird things that it does? I think there's a lot of teachings out there about embodiment now. I mean, my goodness, you can do yoga, you can do Pilates, you can do breath work. There's just tons of really well developed and brilliant approaches about getting back into our body. And as if it's not clear already, I'm saying we absolutely need those as a foundation. And there's a lot of work around your heart, finding your purpose, loving people, being more kind. These are all obvious values and really important lines. And that's why I've already taught courses on the virtues, for example, because of the centrality of working with the heart. But I think the mind is crucially important also and really underutilized. I will sometimes say we confuse ourselves thinking that our inner chatter or our opinions are mental or they're our mind. And I would argue they're not. They're stand-in for our mind. I've often said opinions save us the trouble of thinking. Now, what we encounter, just like we encounter with the body or the heart, there's already a lot going on in our centers. There's automatic kind of programmed stuff that's already happening. And without presence, that's all we can see. That's all we are. But I think as we learn to be present in the centers, the head center starts to open up and our mind can become a tremendously important part. The whole word realization, the whole idea of coming to realization happens in our head center. Of course, it affects our heart and body. But if our head center isn't open, it's going to be very hard to integrate and live the spiritual experiences we've had. So that's very important to me. I'm really interested in how do we live with this? How do we connect these deeper states of consciousness with the way we operate in the world. And the last thing I'd say is I'm very much interested these days in how important awakened minds are for dealing with some of the crucial challenges that exist in our world at this time. We're not going to deal with those challenges that political, ecological, you know, you name it. We aren't going to deal with those just by what we feel. We need to understand things, but we need to get to a kind of deeper level of understanding and cooperation, which are not going to be found in our ego structures. Even when that brilliance leaks through those ego structures to some degree, it impedes our ability to come together and combine our intelligences for the sake of the world, for the sake of the next generations, for the sake of life. And that, brings us back to what we're saying in the beginning about just maybe, there's a bigger plan. To put it in religious language, maybe God feels we're ready for some deeper truth. So for all those reasons, the specificity of this course, I think, is going to be very important to it.
I want to get back to your questions. I know there are many here, but before I take those, I want to give a few details about the Enneagram of the Higher Mind. Please log on to highermindenneagram.com. That's highermindenneagram.com for all the details and to register. So obviously, this is going to be a transformative 8 weeks with Russ, where you'll begin to liberate yourself from the box you don't even know you're in, which Russ has said, and I love that comment. The 8-week course takes place on Wednesdays at noon Pacific, starting October the 16th. And if for any reason you're unable to join us live, don't worry, you won't miss the teachings. You'll receive audio and video replays, transcripts, and any handouts through the course homepage, which is our virtual classroom. Also, I'd like to remind everyone that we offer a no-risk money-back guarantee on all of our courses, giving you a full 2 weeks, in this case until November the 6th, to make sure you absolutely love it. And as an added option, all participants are welcome and encouraged to connect through a private course Facebook group so that you can remain connected and share your experience in the course. And everyone who registers receives the Enneagram of the Higher Mind bonus collection. And this includes 9 Types meditation, which is an audio meditation from Russ and Jessica Dibb, and original ideas behind the Enneagram. This is an audio dialogue between Russ and Cynthia Bourgeot. We also have 2 video teachings from Jessica Dibb to support this course called Living from a Boundless Perspective, an experiential journey through the Holi ideas of points 8, 9, 1, and 2. And the second one, the 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Again, those are video teachings from Jessica to support the Holi ideas. And if you know you want to join us and you register by midnight Pacific tonight, that's October the 10th, you will receive this special bonus, Enneagram and Enlightenment, which is an audio dialogue with Russ and A.H. Almas, Hamid Ali. And join them, Hamid Ali, the creator of the Diamond Approach to Self-Realization, as he describes how we each have a relationship between an inner core and an outer shell. He'll be focusing on how vast and individualized enlightenment is by laying out its infinite landscape and various orientations in both Eastern and Western traditions. All right, over to your questions. So here's one. Is the intention that we begin to access higher aspects of all 9 points, no matter the type we most relate to? And is starting with our own type usually easier, or could it actually be more challenging than we might find exploring the higher aspects of a type that we aren't as closely associated with?
Wow, I'm just getting knocked out by these great questions you guys are sending me. This is just my idea of fun, talking about this stuff. That's a very good question, and I'd like to have some flat answer, like it's like this, but I'm not sure. I would say that for me, working on the particularities of my fixation opens me up to the realm of the holy ideas, let's say, to that higher intellectual center, to the higher mind, the true mind, whatever you want to call that. And from there, the perspectives of the holy ideas may reveal themselves. And I think once some of the primary barriers are softened, then that works. The other thing is that the particular holy idea of my type is seen as a solvent for my fixation. For that reason, Oscar Chazo also called the holy ideas psychocatalyzers. A bit of a mouthful, but what Oscar was saying is that the contemplation of a particular holy idea will help undo the underlying beliefs of our fixated psychological pattern, the pattern of our type. Beyond that, I think the other side of what you're asking is that we don't exactly decide when these non-dual openings to reality occur, and they may have the flavor of another holy idea, another perspective. And so I just tend to work with whatever manifests. Maybe I'm a 5 and I'm working on my my stinginess, or my what I call retention, and seeing how I depend on that a lot. And then that may open me to the holy ideas of the 5. But it could also be that I open to the holy idea of the 3 or the 2 or the 1. And at certain times, anytime we have those non-dual perspectives, they help us relax around these egoic mental patterns and agendas that we often don't even know we have. And as we relax our intense grip on them, deeper resources become available to us. So I suppose I'm saying that working on your own fixation, if you've got your type right, will be a quicker road to opening up to the realm of the holy ideas, the place where they're emanating from, so to speak. But it's also true that you could and will experience all 9 of them in various ways, and that's always something to work with. So I think you were probably intuiting that. I'm getting that you were intuiting that in the question. So I hope that clarifies what you were exploring.
So we had a webcast question and also a Facebook question asking you about your thoughts on Tritype, Russ. Mm-hmm. And do you think they really exist? Is that merely an adaptation on our levels of integration, disintegration?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Tritype is very popular now, and it's very controversial, I know. It's an idea that was put forward in a certain form by Oscar Chazo in the Eureka School back in the day, but it has been mostly championed by my friend Catherine Chernick, and was also by her husband David Faver. But I know many young people have been learning about it. I think there are a lot of interesting theories in the Enneagram world that if we're using them for the right reasons, if we have the right view, the right orientation with them, they can help us. And if we're not having that orientation, they can just keep us running around in circles forever. You can just have your own type description, and it can be something very helpful, or it can be something that you get identified with. I think the danger of Tritype is that people get the wrong idea of what the Enneagram's for, and Tritype can support that in the sense that people want a more and more specific description of their pattern and then take their pattern to be themselves. In other words, they want a more exacting description of what they've mistaken themselves for, of their ego patterns, rather than use this information to see what we are beyond it. Now, on the other hand, and I know that Catherine would agree with this, if you're using Tritype to sort of see more specifically the habits and patterns by which you forget yourself, that you forget to be present, then it can be a very useful thing. I think if we are using these teachings with real inner work, not just spiritual beliefs, that's not spiritual beliefs and inner work, not the same thing. It's one thing to believe certain metaphysical propositions. It's another thing to work on the development of your presence, your consciousness, your compassion, work to let grace get to you. Is one way you could put it, to get yourself out of the way more and more. So really, I feel about Tritype like a lot of teachings. It's Tritype is not a core of what I teach, but I'm not against it per se. And I think, as I said, with the right orientation, it could be a useful tool. And if it helps people get started on their journey of self-discovery, then sure, let's include it in the mix.
So Barbara, Rachel, several others are talking about the Enneagram determined by nature versus nurture, depending on gender in this lifetime or cultural pressure and how that's related. What are your thoughts on how gender, culture affect the Enneagram and how it presents itself?
Well, wow, that's got at least two parts to it. And I don't mean male and female. First of all, I think almost all of the major Enneagram teachers at this stage feel that type is something innate. It's not necessarily entirely genetic, because if that were true, then all identical twins should be the same type, since they have identical genomes. But that's not the case. But type seems to be related to what in psychology we call temperament. And from a very early stage, children have temperament. Babies have temperament. And as I shared recently, my dear departed colleague David Daniels did a major paper on how the great study of childhood temperament done in psychology by the team of Thomas and Chess at New York University back in the early 1960s isolated 9 forms of infant temperament. And Dr. Daniels correlated those with the 9 Enneagram types, and I think successfully so. So there's something very deep in it. We don't become a type because our mom got us the wrong present for our 4th birthday. We don't become a type because we had a bad experience with our 4th grade teacher. Type is set there right at the very beginning of life. Now, that being said, of course, temperament, and this is just basic psychology, it's not just Enneagram, temperament is shaped by culture, by family, by our education in the larger sense of the word. So there's a lot of factors. Are there differences in how type expresses itself in gender? Of course there are. There are ways that are, but I would say in each of the 9 points, I can see things that are different in a traditionally male or female perspective, and there are things that are also similar, that are kind of striking that you'd find in both gender roles. Does this affect how we experience these things if we're members of LGBT communities, for example? Well, yeah, they're going to be specific vicissitudes of our journey as gay or lesbian or bisexual or transgender people. Those are issues and possibilities unto themselves. And I think we would see some things that would be a little different in how type expresses itself, and some things that would be exactly the same. So, I think there's great value in nuance and in holding these definitions lightly. One thing that I say all the time, and I'll definitely be reminding us of this in the course, we don't learn this material to cram ourselves into a definition. We're not here to correspond, and we're not here to get into some kind of frustration pattern because the definitions don't fit us perfectly. The definitions exist to launch us on a journey of self-exploration and to teach us to look in places that we haven't looked before. So we're learning new ways of experiencing ourselves, seeing ourselves, and going beyond some of the categories given to us by culture, by education, by views about our status as whatever we might be identified with as human beings. So, so the answer is both yes and no. It does influence things in very specific ways, and in other ways, a two is a two is a two. Are male twos different in how they express than female twos? Yes, in certain ways, but in certain ways, not.
Thanks, Russ. Well, we're coming close to the end. A couple more questions. Joy is talking about the terms you use. She says you use the words like ordinary mind and higher mind and holy ideas. Does it matter where each of us comes from to be able to understand what holy ideas mean? She's talking about like a spiritual or religious perspective, and often there needs to be a common understanding of the words. Do you understand spirituality and the higher mind as the same in all of these terms? And how will you support people who come from different beliefs around the term holy ideas?
Yeah. Well, first off, I just want to acknowledge that for many people, the term holy ideas itself is somewhat problematic. That's the term that Oscar Chazo used. So, in kind of, let's say, respect to him and the work that he did, I continue to use those terms. But in the way I approach all my Enneagram teaching, and certainly when we're getting into very subtle territory like we'll be exploring in this course, I think it's super important to unpack what we mean by terms. Just putting up a few bullet points doesn't really cut it. Even when we use the terms for the traditional passions and the term passions, what do I mean by passions? I have to explain all that. What do I mean by those words? And one way I do that in every course I've ever taught is I try to talk about these things from different perspectives, from different spiritual traditions, from the point of view of developmental psychology. Is it relevant to Jungian ideas? Are there philosophical ideas that shed light on this? And the question is valid, but the answer is going to always be well, let's put it this way. It's always the case that there are many different things that we can draw on from spiritual traditions, particularly, but also from science and philosophy, because we're looking at the fundamental themes of being a human being. And any great tradition has struggled to understand and grapple with these themes. So sometimes I speak Christian, sometimes I speak Jewish, I can speak Islam if I need to. I speak Buddhist a lot. I studied about Buddhism at university. And sometimes I'm just talking about what we understand from modern psychology. My sense is I want everyone to have available to them entryways into what we're talking about. And I know that people have different background, different things they've already studied or followed as teachings. So I do my best to show the connections between those things and what we're looking at. How is what we're looking at relevant to the spiritual journey you've already been on? Because I'm not here to, convert you to whatever the heck I'm doing. I'm doing what I need to do, but I'm trying to show you how these things that we're studying can be a support and relevant to the journey that you're already on. So that's how I look at it. So yes, I explain what I mean by holy ideas, higher mind, where these sit in relation to other spiritual concepts. For example, even within Enneagram language, I say there's a difference between essential states and holy ideas. And so in the course, we unpack that. We look at the difference. There's a difference between our more standard, ordinary emotions, which tend to be reactions to experiences we're having, and the deeper qualities of the heart, the qualities of the so-called higher emotional center. So, yeah, and whatever we're looking at, I've got to unpack it, or I'm not really being a very effective teacher. So, and that's why having questions at the end of every class is very useful too, because if I don't make it clear, people get to ask, and so it gives me a chance to come at it again.
Well, thank you, Russ. This has been an all too fast hour, I would say. But I want to thank everyone for being with us for this time and for sharing your questions. The Enneagram of the Higher Mind begins Wednesday, October the 16th. And again, please visit highermindenneagram.com to learn more about the course and to register. And if you do so by midnight, October the 10th, that's tonight, October 10th, Pacific, you'll receive a special bonus of Enneagram and Enlightenment between Russ and A.H. Almas. Russ, I want to hand it over to you for final words as we begin to close this session today.
Well, just what can I say other than thank you for coming to join me for this? I hope you got something from our explorations today that will be useful to you. And thank you to the Shift Network and to you, Anne, and everybody behind the scenes for making this possible. I find it kind of amazing that we can do this now and have these kind of conversations. Certainly wasn't possible when I first started exploring and even teaching the Enneagram. So I don't take that for granted that we have the ability to come together like this. Beyond that, I hope you've got some sense of what we'll be up to in this course. I hope it will be helpful and meaningful to you. And again, I just thank you from my heart for spending some time with me today.
Thanks, Russ, so much for all you shared. Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone, for joining us today. You're welcome. And on behalf of all of us here at the Shift Network, I wish you well. And we look forward to having you on this course or on one in the future. Be well.